Okay, so today I'm going to be doing a review on two books, A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan and Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Both of these are going to be spoiler-free reviews. I'll dip into spoilers very briefly for Project Hail Mary, but the majority of this video is spoiler-free. I really enjoyed both these books, so I hope you'll stick with me to talk about both of them, but there will be timestamps in the description if you don't want to. I'm going to start with A Natural History of Dragons, which I really loved. This book felt like, in most ways, it was basically written to my taste. So, A Natural History of Dragons is a kind of sci-fi fantasy. It fits in both categories. We follow Lady Trent, who, I'm going to use the description that was used to sell me on it because it's so accurate. The main character, Lady Trent, is basically like a protagonist in a Jane Austen novel. The setting, it feels like Regency era England, at least in the beginning in England. It's set Regency era is how it feels, even though it's a modern book. And our protagonist is someone who is fascinated by the science, by the biology of dragons. Now, I'm a huge fan of classic dragon fantasy, you know, these mythical creatures that are really rare on the earth and, you know, you have to summon them or you stumble on them. You want, maybe your protagonist is going to get to ride a dragon. Like, I love classic dragon fantasy. This is not it, at all. Not even a little bit. So don't go in thinking that that's what we're doing here. But I've actually never read a book like this. This is completely unique to anything else I've read, which I read a lot of books, so finding something that is totally fresh and completely new and fits into all of what I want out of a book, it's so rare. It was amazing. So I love this setting and this era that the author is recreating, that she's placing her story in. This is written as a memoir to our main character, so I guess that could kind of eliminate some of the stakes because we know she makes it out just fine from all of her endeavors, but it's written as a memoir. So our protagonist is old when we meet her, but she's reflecting on where she began in this book. So we start with her as a child and her fascination in biology, in animals in general, in understanding the way animals work, and her obsession with dragons and the different obstacles and hurdles that she has to face as a woman in this era that just wants to be a naturalist, that wants to understand the science and biology of these creatures, but there are societal expectations on her. In this first book, we follow her as a child, we follow her growing up a little bit, and then the majority of the book, that's just the beginning, the majority of the book is that we follow her and her husband and a few others on her very first expedition. So what's really great about this world, something that I really enjoyed, is that the dragons of this world aren't necessarily these far-off mythical creatures that, you know, are they real, aren't they real, or we know that they're real, but it's rare to actually see one. They're commonplace. This is something that's just accepted about this world. Dragons are around. There are these creatures, sometimes, a lot of times for people like farmers, sheep farmers, they're a menace because the dragons are hunting their sheep. You know, they're just a part of the world. They just exist here. They're these exotic creatures where our protagonist is. They have a menagerie where, you know, you can go and you can see them on display. Anyway, we start with our protagonist and all her different hurdles growing up, as well as in, you know, when she's very young. And then we get to go with her on her very first expedition of finding dragons and studying them with this group of other people. And I enjoyed it so much. I love this era and the setting. I'm a big Jane Austen fan. These white books right here are my Jane Austen collection. I'm a big, you know, I read a lot of classics, and this definitely feels like a classic. So I guess if you don't like classics, then maybe this book won't jive with you. It also has the pacing of a classic, which, you know, a lot of modern books are written to be a lot more punchy, a lot more fast-paced, a lot more thrilling adventures. And this book has those thrilling adventures because it is a memoir. So that kind of funny. So our main character, you know, is recounting the big events in her life. And so because of that, there's a lot of crazy situations that she gets in, sometimes by her own illogical thinking or her own impulsive behavior. She kind of winds up in these situations, but she's in very exciting and fun situations to read, but it's also just not a really fast-paced story. It reads a lot slower at times, so I guess go into it expecting that. But I felt like it flowed really well. You know, I was invested in this story. Our protagonist, Lady Trent, is, oh my goodness, I adore her. I love her so much. In fact, I got attached to her in the very beginning. I think in the prologue itself, I fell for her. The narrative voice, like I said, is her as an old lady, and she's reflecting on herself. So we're seeing her young in this first book, but she still pauses sometimes to give her own commentary and her own wisdom in her age now, which I really I love that dynamic. But also her as you know, a young adult, her being younger, I love her in this stage of life too. Corey, I started this book, and the day I started it, Corey walked in on me reading, and I was crying, and he was like, "You're not very far in that book to already be crying." But I got attached to her so quickly, and the real life stuff that she went through very early on in this book, I hurt for her. And it wasn't the only time I cried in this book. There were several really intense, emotional, exciting and devastating moments just in this short little part of her life. I'm definitely continuing on with the series, if you can't tell. The prose is beautiful. The setting, I think that if there were a story about dragons in this era that she's trying to replicate, this would be it. You know, it fits. It feels like it belongs there, and I love that. I would say the one complaint, or the one thing that didn't fully work for me about this book, is with it being a memoir, you know, fictional memoir. She takes us on the important moments of her life. She takes us through the things that she deems important, which means that every now and then there are things that are being set up, and then we're just there, and then it's like, no, I wanted to get there with you. I wanted to see it happen. And so some of the skipping around that just happens with this format, sometimes I was like, slow down, even though it's not even a fast-paced book, but I was like, show me that part too. I guess just because I was so invested in her, I wanted to see all the details and not just the highs and the lows, which I guess is a pretty good complaint to have. It's not a fault in the book by any means, because it's just it's the nature of the format, and I think that the format was handled so well. I just wanted more. Thankfully, there's 4 more books in this series, and then there's a spin-off series after that, so I'm really happy about that. Okay, Project Hail Mary. So again, this one's also going to be spoiler-free for the most part, but I'll dip into spoilers a little bit there at the end. Another book that I really recommend. This is the author of The Martian, and he wrote another one. The Martian is the really popular one that he has written. This is actually my first Andy Weir book. I have not read The Martian or the other one, obviously, since I don't even know the name of it. And I really enjoyed it. So this book has 2 timelines that we're following. We follow our main character, Rayland. You know, I just call him Grace in my head. Rayland, I think, is his name. Rayland Grace. So at the start of the book, we're with our main character in space, but he's just woken up, and he has a lot of memory loss. He doesn't know how he got here. He doesn't remember his past, who he was before he got to this moment. And then we also get kind of flashbacks as his memory starts returning to him in pieces. So we go back and forth with him in space on this mission, a very specific, important thing that he has to do to try to save all of Earth, essentially. And then we're back with him on Earth as he gets fragmented pieces of his memory, remembering who he once was, and then slowly how we got to this point. So we're with him now, attempting to accomplish this very, very important mission, and then we're with him then at first getting to know who he was back on Earth, and then eventually getting to know more about what we're doing here, what the big problem was, how he got involved in it, and then eventually, finally, how he got to this point, because the two don't really match up. Why would I'm trying to keep it very vague. Why would the person that he was end up here? It doesn't seem to fit. And we eventually that all comes together. This is a very scientific book. Andy Weir is very interested in exploring the science of things and the reasoning of things, which I think he does a really good job of being very technical and being very focused and grounded in science throughout this entire sci-fi novel, but also making it extremely accessible. I think that a lot of the science that we kind of stop to discuss, a lot of it I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that worked that way. And then a lot of it I was like, I don't know what's happening. This is all going over my head. But I never felt lost in the story or in the characters, even when sometimes the science would go over my head. It's a much smarter book than I am, and yet I never felt left behind. And I think that that's a really particular skill that I was really impressed that he pulled off so well. There's also, I'm keeping this spoiler-free part, I'm keeping it very vague because things are unraveled very slowly and in a really satisfying way, so I just don't want to mess that experience up for anyone. There is a character that is introduced at a point in the book that I think made the book. This character is one of the most delightful characters to read. I loved the relationship between our main character and this character that's introduced a chunk of the way in. And I love the relationship between them. I love this character on their own. Every single scene that we got with this particular character was just a delight to read. I loved the way, so Andy Weir really pushed the boundaries a lot with this. You know, the book is very grounded in science, but he also spent a lot of time extending beyond that and theorizing of, okay, but what if we go a little bit farther than what we actually know? What if we create something here? And I think that I really liked what he did. I really liked that it wasn't just real life scenarios, but it was also, but what else can we do? What else? I don't know how to say this. I don't want to give too much away. He reaches beyond what I expected him to reach, and I loved that he did it. I loved how he did it. And I loved that even when he went beyond what was safe and what we know and what was easy, it all was still grounded in, but if this did happen, what would be the science of it? And it wasn't a novel that played safe, and I loved it. I loved it. I enjoyed it so much. Another really big positive about this book is despite it being, you know, a really intense situation that we're in, and despite it being grounded in science and a very smart book, it has such a light tone throughout it because of this sort of dry humor that is placed in every single scene. I mean, everything we do, we're smiling and laughing our way through it, even through really intense moments. It has a general feeling of humor over it, or a feeling of lightheartedness over this entire story. So despite it being a very smart and scientific and at times very intense novel, it's just fun. It's just a fun book to read, which makes it really, really accessible as well. I think my one big complaint about this book, or the one thing that I didn't love as much, is that there were definitely several scenarios that I had to suspend my disbelief on. There were, this is a book of really smart people. It's a book filled with brilliant minds, but there were scenarios where I was like, why did this character do this thing? There were scenarios where I kind of just had to go, all right, I just have to accept that these are the actions of the people. And sometimes it was like, I think they would do something else. I think that that's not the smartest decision here, or that's not the smartest reaction or response, just because the plot needed to move or the plot needed to happen. And I don't love that. But oh well. It does seem, I read this on my Patreon with, you know, my patrons, and based off of the conversations we've had there, it does seem that there are two kind of controversial points in this book. One is the ending. Some people love it. Some people really wanted something different out of it. And the other is a particular character, which I actually love that this character ended up being so controversial, at least among the group of people that I read, because it ended up developing into a lot of really theological discussions, a lot of morality discussions of, was this acceptable, or does this make this person a bad person, and stuff like that, which I think that's great. I think it's great when a book triggers, deeper discussions like that. Dipping into spoilers really quickly, if you haven't read this book, click the timestamps in the description to get to, final thoughts. But spoilers, I want to discuss that controversial character and that controversial ending really, really briefly. Strat is the controversial character. I personally love Strat. I love her personality. I love her very logical approach toward life. She has humanity. She has empathy. She's aware of the emotions and feelings of the people around her, but at the end of the day, she just cares about getting done what needs to get done for the sake of what she believes could potentially save, billions of people. And that includes doing really immoral things. And it was really fun discussing that. Does that make Strat a terrible person, what she did to Grace? Or does that just make her, yes, she did a terrible thing, but she did also save humanity with that terrible thing. Grace saved humanity, but you know what I mean. That decision saved humanity. So while, yes, she is a very flawed person, she's a very, she's not the type of person that you necessarily need to interact with or would want to hang out in the same room with all the time, but she gets done what needs to get done for this mission. At the expense of a person, though. So we had a lot of really interesting discussions around that. What do some people came out of the story hating her, and some people came out of the story saying, oh yeah, what she did was terrible, but it saved the Earth. I would love to discuss that further in the comments, how you guys feel about it. Just make sure to do the spoiler space thing. I guess I'll also briefly mention there were a few scenarios where I was like, but why didn't they? And it kind of, why? One particular one was the fact that this member of their team, Grace, our main character, this member of their team just disappeared at the very end, right before they launched into space, and then appeared again on day of launch, passed out, and, he's just strapped in and they're just like, it's fine. We knocked him out because he was nervous. But it's like, I feel like the team would have questions. I feel like the team would be like, this seems sus. Also, there were a few situations like that where I was just kind of like, everyone was just fine with this. Everybody was just cool with this. Another one was, Grace had these beetles, and I just kept waiting for him to use one to send back even something as simple as a photograph of the alien life form that he's discovered, that he's found, that he's interacting with. Maybe some notes about it. Maybe the Earth would want to know this. Maybe he would want to document it. Maybe as a scientist, he would want to share this discovery. But it never even crossed his mind. Like, he had these beetles that he could send back to Earth, and it never even crossed his mind. And I don't understand why. I don't understand why he didn't even try to send back this information. I'm glad he didn't, because I want these aliens to be left alone. I don't want the humans to interfere with them. But he didn't, and I don't understand why he didn't even think about it. Of course, we needed those beetles later on, but he can't have predicted that he would have used them in the way that he did. I don't know. It seemed like he would have tried to get that information to Earth. I personally loved the ending. I wanted him to stay on the new planet with, his pal, with Rocky. I loved that Rocky ended up with Adrian in the end, that she was still, I assume, waiting for him. I thought that was really sweet. And I loved that he was teaching the little kid aliens. He was still a teacher on this new Earth. I wanted him to stay, not on this new Earth, on this new planet. I wanted him to stay there. I wanted him to stay there and not go back to Earth, because the Earth has changed at this point. The Earth is different. He didn't even really have much on Earth other than his teaching job and his students. So if he would have gone back, I just don't think he would have been satisfied. The Earth was different. His life was different. His experiences were different. He himself had changed so much, and trying to fit back into his old life, I don't think could have been satisfying for him. But he found a new life. He found some found family. He had a best friend there in this new planet, and he was the alien there, and they treated him well. And I wanted him to stay there. I wanted him to stay in his new life and live happily ever after. There were some people that were pretty disappointed with this ending because they wanted to see the state of the Earth. They wanted to see how it survived, what kind of condition it was in. They wanted the ending of this, us rescuing Earth. We didn't get that, and that disappointed some people, and I really understand that. For me, I thought that the open ending in that regard was really satisfying. We're left to understand that the Earth was saved, but we don't know to what extent or what it looks like now, and I actually kind of liked that because I was a lot more invested in Grace and Rocky than I was in, I guess I really love Strat. But other than that, there weren't any people back home that I cared about. So I was fine to just end here with Grace and Rocky. But I do understand why that wouldn't be satisfying for everyone. That makes sense to me. Anyway, final thoughts. I really, really enjoyed both of these books. Both books I thought were a blast. I'm definitely continuing on with The Natural History of Dragons. I don't think I'm probably going to read The Martian or the other Andy Weir book that came out before these, but I did really, really, really enjoy Project Hail Mary. I highly recommend both. I hope that these spoiler-free reviews helped you to know these books a little bit more, know what they're about, and give you a good sense of if you want to pick them up or not. I'd love to continue chatting with you about it in the comments. Are you going to pick up one of these books? Have you already? And if you have, can we discuss them more? I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you again soon. Bye.